Amelia here from Studying Australia TV. Today, we're going to talk music and the history of music in Australia. Music of Australia has an extensive history made up from many music societies. Indigenous Australian music is a part of the unique heritage of a 40,000 to 60,000 year history which produced the iconic didgeridoo. For those that don't know, a didgeridoo is a long wooden flute, perhaps the oldest musical instrument on earth. It's played with continuously vibrating lips to produce a continuous drone while using a special breathing technique called circular breathing. An experienced didgeridoo musician can theoretically play music for hours. Contemporary fusions of Indigenous and Western styles exemplified in the works of No Fixed Address, Yothu Yindi, Christine Anu, and Geoffrey Gurrumul Yupingu mark distinctly Australian contributions to the world music. Given Australia was originally a British colony, Australian folk music and bush ballads such as Waltzing Matilda were heavily influenced by Anglo-Celtic traditions, while classical forms were derived from those of Europe. Contemporary Australian music also ranges across a broad spectrum, with trends often concurrent with those of the US and the UK, notably in the Australian rock and Australian country music genres. Indigenous Australian music refers to the music of the Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders. Music forms an integral part of the social, cultural, and ceremonial observances of these peoples, and have been so for over 50,000 years. Traditional Indigenous music is best characterised by the didgeridoo, the best known instrument. Archaeological studies of rock art in Northern Territory of Australia suggest people of the Kakadu region were playing the instrument at least 15,000 years ago. Wow! Contemporary Indigenous Australian music has covered numerous styles, including rock and roll, country, hip-hop, and reggae. Jimmy Little is regarded as the first Aboriginal performer to achieve mainstream success, with his debut 1964 song, The Royal Telephone, highly popular and successful back then. In 2005, Little was presented with an honorary doctorate in music by the University of Sydney. Despite the popularity of some of his work, Little failed to launch Indigenous music in the country. From 1970 onwards, groups such as Coloured Stone, Warumpi Band, and No Fixed Address helped improve the image of the genre. It was to be Yothu Yindi that brought Indigenous music to the mainstream, with their 1991 song Treaty from the album Tribal Voice becoming a hit. It reached number 11 on the Australian ARIA singles chart. The band's performances were based on the traditional Yolngu dance and embodied a sharing of culture. The success of Yothu Yindi, winners of 8 ARIA awards, was followed in by Geoffrey Gurrumul Yupingu, Titus, Christine Anu, Archie Roach, and numerous other Indigenous Australian musicians. What about folk music, you might ask? For much of its history, Australia's bush music belonged to an oral and folkloric tradition, and was only later published in print in volumes such as Banjo Patterson's Old Bush Songs in the 1890s. The distinctive themes and origins of Australia's bush music, or bush band music, can be traced back to the songs sung by the convicts who were sent to Australia during the early period of British colonisation, beginning in 1788. Early Australian ballads sing of the harsh ways of the epoch and of such people and events such as bushrangers, swagmen, drovers, stockmen, and shearers. Convict and bushranger verses often railed against government tyranny. Classic bush songs on such themes include The Wild Colonial Boy, Click Go the Shears, The Drover's Dream, The Queensland Drover, The Dying Stockman, and Moreton Bay. Later themes which endure to the present include the experiences of war, of droughts and flooding rains, of Aboriginality and the railways, and tracking routes which link Australia's vast distances. Isolation and loneliness of life in the Australian bush have been another theme. Waltzing Matilda, often regarded as Australia's unofficial national anthem, is a quintessential Australian folk song, influenced by Celtic folk ballads. Country and folk artists such as Tex Morton, Slim Dusty, Rolf Harris, the Bushwhackers, John Williamson, and John Schumann of the band Red Gum have continued to record and popularise the old bush ballads of Australia through the 20th and into the 21st century. And contemporary artists, including Sarah Storer and Lee Kernaghan, draw heavily on this heritage. And then there was the folk revival. Notable Australian exponents of the folk revival movement included both European immigrants such as Eric Bogle, noted for his sad lament to the Battle of Gallipoli, and the band played Waltzing Matilda, and Indigenous Australians like Archie Roach and Paul Kelly. Kelly's lyrics capture the vastness of the culture and landscape of Australia by chronicling life about him over 30 years. David Fricke from the Rolling Stone calls Kelly one of the finest songwriters I have ever heard, Australian or otherwise. In the 1970s, Australian folk rock brought both familiar and less familiar traditional songs, as well as new compositions, to live venues and the airwaves. Notable artists include the Bushwhackers Band and Red Gum. Red Gum are known for their 1983 anti-war protest song I Was Only 19, which peaked at number 1 on the national singles charts. The 1990s brought Australian Indigenous folk rock to the world, led by bands including Go Through Yindi. Australia's long and continuous folk tradition continues strongly to this day, with elements of folk music still present in many contemporary artists, including those generally thought of as rock, heavy metal, and alternative music. So now, let's move on to country music. Australia has a long tradition of country music, which has developed a style quite distinct from its US counterpart. The early roots of Australian country are related to traditional folk music traditions of Ireland, England, and Scotland. Botany Bay from the late 19th century is one example. Waltz Matilda is a quintessential Australian country song influenced more by Celtic folk ballads than by American country and Western music. The strain of Australian country music, with lyrics focusing on strictly Australian subjects, is generally known as bush music or bush band music. The most successful Australian bush band is Melbourne's The Bushwhackers, active since the early 1970s. Other well-known country singers include Reg Lindsay, bush balladeer singer Buddy Williams, and entertainers Johnny Ashcroft and Chad Morgan. Another more Americanized form of Australian country music was pioneered in the 1930s by such recording artists as Tex Morton and later popularized by Slim Dusty, best remembered for his 1957 song, A Pub with No Beer, and Smokey Dawson. Dusty married singer-songwriter Joy McKean in 1951 and became Australia's biggest selling domestic music artist with more than 7 million record sales. British-born country singer and yodeler Frank Ifield was one of the first Australian post-war performers to gain widespread international recognition. After returning to the UK in 1959, Ifield was successful in the early 1960s, becoming the first performer to have 3 consecutive #1 hits on the UK charts: I Remember You, Lovesick Blues, both released in 1962, and The Wayward Wind in 1963. I Remember You was also a top 5 hit in the US. Other Australian country artists including Olivia Newton-John, Sherry Austin and Keith Urban have achieved considerable success in the USA. In recent years, local contemporary country music, featuring much crossover with popular music, have popularity in Australia. Notable musicians of this genre include David Hudson, John Williamson, Gina Jeffries, Lee Kernaghan, Troy Cassadaly, Sarah Storer, Felicity Urquhart, and Casey Chambers. Others influenced by the genre include Nick Cave, Paul Kelly, the John Butler Trio, Jagged Stone, and The Waves. Popular Australian country songs include Click Go the Shears, Lights on the Hill, released in 1973, I Honestly Love You in 1974, True Blue in 1981, and Not Pretty Enough in 2002. And now we can't forget children's music. Children's music in Australia developed gradually over the latter half of the 20th century. The most recognised performers in that period were those associated with the long-running Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the ABC series Play School, including veteran actor-musician Don Spencer and actor-singer Noni Hazelhurst. Children's music remained a relatively small segment of the Australian music industry until the emergence of groundbreaking children's group The Wiggles in the late 1990s. The multi-award-winning 4-piece group rapidly gained international popularity in the early 2000s, and by the end of the decade, they had become one of the most popular children's groups in the world. The Wiggles now boast a huge fan base in many regions, including Australasia, Britain, Asia, and the Americas. In 2008, the Wiggles were named Business Review Weekly's top-earning Australian entertainers for the 4th year in a row, having earned $45 million in 2007. They've been called the world's biggest preschool band and your child's first rock band. The group has achieved worldwide success with their children's albums, videos, television series, and concert appearances. They've earned 17 gold, 12 platinum, 3 double platinum, and 10 multi-platinum awards for sales of over 17 million DVDs and 4 million CDs. By 2002, the Wiggles had become the ABC's most successful preschool television program. They performed for over 1.5 million children in the US between 2005 and 2008 and won APRA Songwriting Awards for Best Children's Song 3 times and earned ADSDA's award for the highest selling children's album 4 times. They've also been nominated for ARIA's Best Children's Album Award 19 times and won the award 12 times. In 2003, they received ARIA's Outstanding Achievement Award for their successes in the US. Let's move on to R&B and soul music. R&B soul music had a significant impact on Australians' music, although it is notable that many seminal recordings in this genre by American acts of the late 20th century were not played on Australian radio. Despite radio's reluctance to play American soul R&B originals, these styles were avidly adopted by local performers, and covers of soul R&B standards were staples in the setlist of many acts, including Max Merritt and the Meteors, Doug Parkinson, Jeff St. John, The Group, The Groove, The Twilights, Renee Geyer, and many others. Renee Geyer is an Australian singer who came to prominence in the mid-1970s, has long been regarded as one of the finest exponents of jazz, soul, and R&B idioms. She had commercial success as a solo artist in Australia with It's a Man's World. Rock historian Ian McFarlane describes her as having a rich, soulful, passionate, and husky vocal delivery. Geyer's iconic status in the Australian music industry was recognised when she was inducted into the Hall of Fame on the 14th of July 2005. Parallel with Geyer's success, American-born vocalist Marcia Hines emerged as one of Australia's most successful solo singers. She first came to prominence in the early 1970s with critically acclaimed roles in local stage productions of Hair and Jesus Christ Superstar, in which she was the first African-American to play the role of Mary Magdalene before launching a solo career. By the late 1970s, she was one of Australia's top singing stars, winning several Queen of Pop awards and hosting her own national TV variety series. Following their initial dissolution in 1982, Cold Chisel lead vocalist Jimmy Barnes embarked on a successful solo career that has continued from the 1980s to the present. Many of Barnes' albums have featured versions of songs from these genres, and his chart-topping album Soul Deep in 1991 consisted entirely of covers of classic 1960s soul R&B covers. Australian soul singer-songwriters like Daniel Merriweather has, after several successful collaborations with artists such as Mark Ronson, released his official debut album, Love and War, in June 2009. It entered the UK albums chart at number 2. After launching his career as the winner of an early series of Australian Idol, soul singer-songwriter Guy Sebastian has also made an impact on this genre in Australia, winning awards at the Urban Music Awards Australia and New Zealand for Best Male Artist and Best R&B Album. Sebastian's release, Like It Like That, was the highest selling Australian single in 2009 and charted number 1 for 2 consecutive weeks. In 2004, Australian Idol finalist Paulini's debut single Angel Eyes and album One Determined Heart both reached number 1 on the ARIA charts and was certified platinum. Paulini earned ARIA number 1 chart awards for both the single and the album. Her second album, Superwoman, included the singles Rough Day and So Over You, and earned Paulini 2 nominations at the 2007 Urban Music Awards for Best R&B Album and Best Female Artist. 2006 Australian Idol runner-up Jessica Mauboy made her musical solo debut in 2008 with the single Running Back, which featured American rapper Flo Rida, and peaked at number 3 on the ARIA singles chart, eventually being certified double platinum. Her debut album, Been Waiting, earned her 7 nominations at the 2009 ARIA Music Awards, winning the award of highest selling single for Running Back. Mauboy has continued to enjoy success with singles such as Burn, Saturday Night featuring Ludacris, and Inescapable. R&B and pop singer Cody Simpson has achieved international acclaim and has been compared to the likes of Justin Bieber and Miley Cyrus. Simpson's music has charted all over the world. Soul singer Gabrielle Climley, possessing a voice and singing style similar to Amy Winehouse, has managed to achieve a degree of international success since 2007, with singles like Sweet About Me. Other singers in the R&B soul genre include Jade McRae, Israel Cruz, Stan Walker, and Ricky Lee Coulter, who experimented with R&B for her first 2 albums, Ricky Lee in 2005 and Brand New Day in 2007. Lowrider is one of Australia's few indie pop soul bands forming in 2003. Lowrider released their self-titled debut album Lowrider in 2006 and Diamond Amongst Thieves in 2008. In July 2010, Lowrider released Round the World and was nominated for an Australian Music Industry ARIA Music Awards for Best Urban Album. Hey, so what about reggae, man? Reggae had success on the radio charts in Australia in the early 1980s when Toots and the Maytals, the first artists to use the term reggae in song, went to number 1 with their song Beautiful Woman. Early reggae groups from Australia included JJ Roberts, No Fixed Address, The Igniters, Larry Maluma, and Untabu, featuring Ron Jemmett. By far, the most popular style in Australia has been rock and pop. Australia has produced a wide variety of rock and popular music from the internationally successful groups AC/DC, INXS, Nick Cave, Savage Garden, The Seekers, or pop divas Delta Goodrem, Kylie Minogue, to the popular local content of John Farnham, Jimmy Barnes, or Paul Kelly. Indigenous Australian music and Australian jazz have also had crossover influence on this genre. Early Australian rock and roll stars included Cold Joy and Johnny O'Keefe. O'Keefe formed a band in 1956. His hit Wild One made him the first Australian rock and roller to reach the national charts. While US and British content dominated airwaves and record sales into the 1960s, local successes began to emerge. Notably, the Easy Beats and the folk pop group The Seekers had significant local success and some international recognition, while AC/DC had their first hits in Australia before going on to international success. Pub rock was popular in the 1980s, and the era was typified by AC/DC, Divinals, Mental as Anything, Midnight Oil, The Choir Boys, The Angels, Noiseworks, Air Supply, Cold Chisel, and Icehouse. INXS and Men at Work also achieved fame worldwide, and the song Down Under became an unofficial anthem for Australia. Australian hip-hop began in the early 1980s, primarily influenced by overseas works, but by the 1990s a distinctive local style had emerged, with groups such as the Hilltop Hoods achieving international acclaim for their work. The 1990s saw an increase in the popularity of indie rock in Australia. AC/DC and INXS continued to achieve commercial success in the United States, whilst a multitude of local bands, including Jebediah, Magic Dirt, Diana Anade, who achieved number 1 on the Australian indie charts and number 26 on the US Billboard chart, Spiderbait, The Super Jesus, Regurgitation, UMI, Ice Cream Hands, Powderfinger, Silverchair, and Something for Kate were popular throughout the country. A small electronic music scene emerged around Sydney and Melbourne, with Severed Heads and Ollie Olsen's No Peeking in the 1990s. Australian music experienced a rock renaissance in the 2000s, with groups such as The Vines, Jet, Airborne, and Wolfmother charting internationally. Hilltop Hoods were the first Australian hip-hop group to reach the top of the ARIA chart. Channel 10's Australian Idol program was highly popular locally, as with many of the idols produced. What about the first wave of Australian rock? In the mid-1950s, American rock and roll spread across the world. Sydney's independent record label, Festival Records, was the first to get onto the bandwagon in Australia, releasing Bill Haley and His Comets, Rock Around the Clock, in 1956. It became the biggest selling Australian single ever released up to that time. American-born entrepreneur Lee Gordon, who arrived in Australia in 1953, played a key role in establishing the popularity of rock and roll with his famous Big Show tours, which brought to Australia many leading American rock and roll acts, including Bill Haley and His Comets, Little Richard, Bo Diddley, Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent, Buddy Holly, and the Crickets, and Jerry Lee Lewis. Gordon was also instrumental in launching the career of Johnny O'Keefe, the first Australian rock star who rose to fame by imitating Americans like Elvis Presley and Little Richard. O'Keefe and other first-wave bands were popular until about 1961, when a wave of clean-cut family bands took their place. Though mainstream audiences in the early 60s preferred a clean-cut style, epitomized by the acts that appeared on the Nine Network pop show Bandstand, there were a number of grungier, guitar-oriented bands in the major cities like Sydney and Melbourne, who were inspired by American and British instrumental and surf acts like Britain's The Shadows, who exerted an enormous influence on Australian and New Zealand music prior to the emergence of the Beatles, and American acts like guitar legend Dick Dale and the Surfarists. Notable Australian instrumental groups of this period included the Atlantics, the Denver Men, the Thunderbirds, the Planets, the DJs, the Joy Boys, the Fabulous Blue Jays, and the Whispers. Jazz was another important influence on the first wave of Australian rock. Unlike the musicians in bands such as the Comets or Elvis Presley's backing band, who had rockabilly or country music background, many musicians in Australia are rock and roll bands, such as Johnny O'Keefe's famous backing group, the DJs, had a solid background in jazz. Moving on to the second wave of Australian rock. The second wave of Australian rock is said to have begun in about 1964 and followed directly on the impact of the Beatles. In the immediate wake of the Beatles' momentous Australian tour, many local groups that had formerly played guitar-based instrumental music recruited singers and took up the new beat style. Some of the best known and most popular acts in this period were Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs, and Ray Brown and the Whispers, the Easy Beats, the Masters Apprentices, the Twilights, the Group, the Groove, the Loved Ones, and cult acts like the Throb and solo star Normie Rowe, who quickly became Australia's most popular male pop vocalist. During this period, a wave of new acts also came from New Zealand, including Ray Columbus and the Invaders, Max Merritt and the Meteors, Dinah Lee, Larry's Rebels, and the La-Di-Dahs. Many Australian bands and singers tried to enhance their careers by moving overseas, in particular to England, then seen as the mecca of popular music. But few bands were successful, and of those who relocated to the UK, only the Seekers enjoyed any lasting success. Others that made the journey were the Easy Beats, the first rock band to crack the UK market, the Twilights, the Groove, Lloyd's World, and the La-Di-Dahs. So the third wave of Australian rock began around 1970, by which time most of the major local pop groups of the 1960s had dissolved and former solo stars like Normie Rowe had faded from view. Few acts from this era attained major international success, and it was even difficult to achieve success across Australia due to the low radio airplay and the increasing dominance of overseas performers on the charts. A pivotal event was the 1970 radio ban, which lasted from May to October that year. The ban was the climax of a simmering pay-for-play dispute between major record companies and commercial radio stations who refused to pay a proposed new copyright fee for playing pop records on air. The dispute erupted into open conflict in May 1970. Many commercial stations boycotted records by the labels involved and refused to list their releases on their top 40 charts, while the record companies in turn refused to supply radio with free promotional copies of new releases. An unexpected side effect of the ban was that several emerging Australian acts signed to independent labels who were not part of the dispute and scored hits with covers of overseas hits. These included the Mixtures cover of Mungo Jerry's In the Summertime and Liv Mason's cover of the Mary Hopkins Eurovision song Knock Knock Who's There. Despite commercial radio resistance to the more progressive music being produced by bands like Spectrum and Tully, acts as diverse as AC/DC, Sherbet and John Paul Young were able to achieve major success and develop a unique sound for Australian rock. From 1975, key agents for the increased exposure of local music were the nationally broadcast ABC TV television pop show Countdown, which premiered in the late 1974, and Australia's first non-commercial all-rock radio station, Double J, which opened in January 1975. Hard rock bands AC/DC and Rose Tattoo, and harmony rock group Little River Band also found major overseas success in the late 1970s and early 1980s, touring all over the world. Meanwhile, a score of Australian expatriate solo performers like Helen Reddy, Olivia Newton-John, and Peter Allen became major stars in the US and internationally. This period also saw bands like Skyhooks moving towards new wave music, and the late 1970s saw the emergence of pioneering punk rock bands like The Saints and Radio Birdman, as well as electronic musical groups such as Cy Bottom, Severed Heads, Whirlwind, and Essendon Airport. Perhaps most influential of the underground scenes, however, was the burgeoning Australian pub rock circuit, which developed in the early 1970s and played a key role in the emergence of major bands of the late 1970s and early 1980s, including Cold Chisel and the Angels, and in Sydney, Midnight Oil and Matt Finish. From the post-punk music scene, which had sprung up in Melbourne, came The Boys Next Door, featuring guitarist Rowland S. Howard and Nick Cave. The Boys Next Door eventually became the birthday party. The Australian music industry as a business began to formalise during the late 1960s and the 1970s. Although not taken seriously by the mainstream business community in those early years, none could discount the pioneering spirit and business acumen of the likes of Michael Glinsky, Michael Chugg, Glenn Wheatley, Harry M. Miller, Bill Armstrong, an Australian music producer, Kevin Jacobson, Phil Dwyer, and Ian "Molly" Meldrum. These were the people largely responsible for promoting and developing the Australian music business during those formative years. Clubs and venues catering for the demand of live band entertainment flourished in capital cities all over the country. However, the central development of the Australian music industry during these years was in Sydney and Melbourne. Clubs such as Checkers and the Bondi Lifesaver and Coogee Bay Hotel in Sydney and Thumpin' Tum, Catcher Birdies, Sebastian's, the Hard Rock Cafe, and the Q Club in Melbourne were synonymous with the biggest names in Australian rock and roll. In 1970, the first ever outdoor music festival, modelled on Woodstock, was held at Oranba, near Sydney, and several others followed over the next 2 years, but most were a financial failure. In 1972, the first festival that proved successful enough to be repeated was the 1972 Festival, which attracted some 35,000 music fans from across the country to Sunbury, Melbourne. Pop magazines such as Ghost Set, which began in 1966, The Daily Planet, Ram, and Duke, and television programs such as Countdown, Uptight, Sound Unlimited, and Happening 70 promoted Australian popular music to a youth market who had never before experienced such media exposure of their idols and stars. Pop stars were now being created by direct marketing to a targeted teenage audience. Recording studios such as 301, Alberts, and Trafalgar in Sydney, and Armstrong Studios and TCS in Melbourne became legendary. Independent label Mushroom Records was founded in 1973, and although it struggled to survive for its first 2 years of existence, it was saved in early 1975 by the nationwide commercial breakthrough of Skyhooks, whose debut LP became the biggest selling Australian rock album to ever release up to that time. This success enabled Mushroom to become a significant player in the Australian music industry and to compete with established companies like EMI, CBS, and Festival. The bands and solo artists who shaped Australian music during these seminal years included INXS. INXS were an Australian rock band formed as the Farris Brothers in 1977 in Sydney. The band's founding members were the bassist Gary Beers, main composer and keyboardist Andrew Farris, drummer John Farris, guitarist Tim Farris, and lead singer and main lyricist Michael Hutchins, and guitarist and saxophonist Kirk Paisley. For 20 years, INXS was fronted by Hutchins, whose magnetic stage presence made him the focal point of the band. In 1984, INXS had their first #1 hit in Australia with Original Sin. The band would later achieve international success in the mid to late 1980s and early 1990s with the hit albums Listen Like Thieves, Kick, and X, as well as the singles What You Need You Tonight, and the band's only US #1 single Devil Inside, Never Tear Us Apart, Suicide Blonde, and New Sensation. After Hutchins' death on the 22nd of November 1997, INXS made appearances with several guest singers and toured and recorded with John Stevens as lead singer beginning in 2000. INXS won 6 ARIA Awards, including 3 for Best Group in 1987, 1989, and 1992. The band was inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame in 2001. INXS has sold over 75 million albums worldwide, making them one of Australia's biggest selling music acts of all time. Skyhooks were an Australian rock band formed in Melbourne in March 1973 by mainstays Greg McCange on bass, guitar, and backing vocals, and Imnan's Freddie Strauchs on drums. They were soon joined by Bob Bongo Starkey on guitar and backing vocals, and Red Simmons on guitar, vocals, and keyboards. Graham Shirley Strawn became the first lead vocalist in March 1974. Described as a glam rock band because of the flamboyant costumes and makeup, Skyhooks addressed issues including buying drugs in Carlton, Lygon Street Limbo, sex and commitments in Bowen Calling, and the gay scene in Toorak Cowboy, and loss of girlfriends in somewhere in Sydney by name-checking Australian locales. According to music historian Ian McFarlane, Skyhooks made an enormous impact on Australian social life. Skyhooks had #1 albums on the Australian Kent Music Report with their 1974 debut, Living in the 70s, for 16 weeks, and its 1975 follow-up, Ego Is Not a Dirty Word, for 11 weeks. Their number one singles were Horror Movie in January 1975 and Jukebox in Siberia in November 1990. AC/DC is an iconic Aussie band formed in 1973 in Sydney by Scottish-born brothers Malcolm and Angus Young and singer Bon Scott. The band played predominantly rock and roll and hard rock, and were renowned for playing live hard as well. Angus Young is well known for his energetic performances and schoolboy uniform stage outfits. Highway to Hell, their sixth studio album, released on 27th of July 1979, was the band's fifth studio album released internationally, and the sixth to be released in Australia. It was the last album featuring Bon Scott, who subsequently died in February 1980. The best-selling song from this album, also named Highway to Hell, now has over 650 million listens on Spotify. The group considered disbanding after Scott's death, but elected to stay together, bringing in longtime Geordie vocalist Brian Johnson as Scott's replacement. Later that year, the band released their first album, Back in Black, which was dedicated to Scott's memory. The album became one of the best-selling albums of all time, with the same named song, Back in Black, now having over 660 million listens on Spotify. The band's eighth studio album, For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, was their first album to reach number one in the United States. AC/DC have also sold more than 200 million records worldwide, including 75 million albums in the United States, making them the 9th highest selling band in the US and the 16th worldwide. AC/DC were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2003. Daddy Cool formed in Melbourne in 1970 with the original lineup of Wayne Duncan, bass vocals, Ross Hannaford, lead guitar, bass and vocals, Ross Wilson, lead vocals, rhythm guitar, harmonica, and Gary Young, drums and vocals. Their debut single, Eagle Rock, was released in May 1971 and stayed at number one on the Australian singles chart for 10 weeks. Their debut album, Daddy Who, Daddy Cool, also reached number one and became the first Australian album to sell more than 100,000 copies. The group's name came from the 1957 song Daddy Cool by US rock group The Rays. Daddy Cool included their version of this song on Daddy Who, Daddy Cool. Daddy Cool's music was originally largely 1950s doo-wop style cover versions and originals mostly written by Wilson. On stage, they provide a danceable sound which was accessible and fun. Their second album, Sex, Dope, Rock and Roll, Teenage Heaven, from 1972, also reached the top 10. Their iconic status was confirmed when they were inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame on the 16th of August 2006. Marcia Hines is an American-Australian vocalist, actress, and TV personality. Hines made her debut at the age of 16 in the Australian production of the stage musical Hair and followed with the role of Mary Magdalene in Jesus Christ Superstar. She achieved her greatest commercial successes as a recording artist during the late 1970s with several hit singles, including cover versions of Fire and Rain, I Just Don't Know What to Do With Myself, You, and Something's Missing in My Life. And her top 10 albums, Marcia Hines, Shining, and Ladies and Gentlemen. Hines was voted Queen of Pop by TV Week's readers for 3 consecutive years from 1976. Hines stopped recording in the early 1980s until she returned with Right Here and Now in 1994, the same year she became an Australian citizen. She was the subject of the 2001 biography Diva, The Life of Marcia Hines, which coincided with the release of the compilation album Diva. Since 2003, she's been a judge on Australian Idol, and her elevated profile led to a renewed interest in her as a performer. Her 2006 album Discotheque peaked at number 6 on the ARIA Albums chart. Hines was inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame on the 18th of July 2007. Air Supply is a soft rock duo consisting of English singer-songwriter and guitarist Graham Russell and Australian lead vocalist Russell Hitchcock. They had a succession of hits worldwide, including 8 top 10 hits in the United States in the early 1980s. They formed in Australia in 1975 and have included various accompanying musicians and singers. ARIA inducted Air Supply into their Hall of Fame on December 1st, 2013 at the annual ARIA Awards. The Angels formed in Taperoo, a small beachside suburb in Adelaide in 1974. as the Keystone Angels by Bernard Doc Neeson on lead vocals and bass guitar, John Brewster on rhythm guitar and backing vocals, his brother Rick Brewster on lead guitar and backing vocals, Charlie King on drums. In 1976, King was replaced by Graham Buzz Bidstrop on drums. Chris Bailey took over bass duties so Neeson could focus solely on vocals, and they changed their name to just The Angels. Their top 20 singles are No Secrets in 1980, Into the Heat in 1981, We Gotta Get Out of This Place in 1987, Am I Ever Gonna See Your Face Again in 1988, Let the Night Roll On, and Dogs Are Talking both in 1990. The Angels have been cited by Guns N' Roses, Cheap Trick, who became friends and touring buddies, Great White, who have covered 2 of their songs, and Seattle grunge band Pearl Jam, amongst many others, as having influenced their music. The Angels were inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame in October 1998. Ian McFarlane declared that the Angels had a profound effect on the Australian live music scene of the late 1970s and early 1980s. They helped redefine the Australian pub rock tradition. Their band of no-frills, hard-driving boogie rock attracted pub goers in unprecedented numbers. Richard Clapton is a singer-songwriter, guitarist, and producer. His solo top 20 hits on the Kent Music Report singles chart are Girls on the Avenue in 1975 and I Am an Island in 1982. He reached the top 20 on the related albums chart with Goodbye Tiger in 1977, Hearts in the Nightline in 1979, The Great Escape in 1982, and The Very Best of Richard Clapton in 1982. Clapton's highest charting album, Music is Love, 1966 to 1970, peaked at number 3 on the ARIA charts. As a producer, he worked on the second In Excess album, Underneath the Colours, in 1981. In 1983, he briefly joined the Party Boys for a tour of Eastern Australia and their live album, Greatest Hits of Other People, in 1983, before resuming his solo career. Australian rock music historian Ian McFarlane described Clapton as one of the most important Australian singer-songwriters of the 1970s. On the 12th of October 1999, Clapton was inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame. Chisel are a pub rock band which formed in Adelaide in 1973 by mainstay members Ian Moss on guitar and vocals, Steve Presswich on drums, and Don Walker on piano and keyboards. They were soon joined by Jimmy Barnes on lead vocals, and in 1975, Phil Small became their bass guitarist. The group disbanded in late 1983 but subsequently reformed several times. Musicologist Ian McFarlane wrote that they became one of Australia's best loved groups, as well as one of the best live bands, fusing a combination of rockabilly, hard rock, and rough house soul and blues that was defiantly Australian in outlook. 8 of their studio albums have reached the Australian top 5. Breakfast at Sweethearts in February 1979, East, June 1980, Circus Animals in March 1982, number 1, 20th Century in April 1984, another number 1, The Last Wave of Summer, October 1998, number 1, No Plans in April 2012, The Perfect Crime, October 2015, and Blood Moon, December 2019, number 1. Their top 10 singles are Forever Now in 1982, Hands Out of My Pocket in 1994, and The Things I Love in You, 1998. At the ARIA Music Awards in 1993, they were inducted into the Hall of Fame. In 2001, Australasian Performing Right Association, APRA, listed their single, Kessan, in May 1978 at number 8 of the all-time best Australian songs. Circus Animals was listed at number 4 in the book, 100 Best Australian Albums, October 2010, while East appeared at number 53. They won the Ted Albert Award for Outstanding Services to Australian Music at the APRA Music Awards of 2016. Cold Chisel's popularity is largely restricted to Australia and New Zealand, with their songs and musicianship highlighting working class life. John Farnham, AO, is a British-born Australian singer. Farnham was a teen pop idol from 1967 until 1979, billed then as Johnny Farnham, but has since forged a career as an adult contemporary singer. His career has mostly been as a solo artist, although he replaced Glenn Shorrock as the lead singer of Little River Band from 1982 to 1985. In September 1986, his solo single, You're the Voice, peaked at number 1 on the Australian singles charts. The associated album, Whispering Jack, held the number 1 position for a total of 25 weeks, and is the second highest selling album in Australian history. Both the single and the album had top 10 success internationally, including number 1 in Sweden. Farnham has become one of his country's best known and most popular performers, and he is the only Australian artist to have a #1 record in 5 consecutive decades, echoing that of Sir Cliff Richard in the UK, with singles Sadie, the Cleaning Lady in 1967, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head in 1970, and Age of Reason in 1988, and albums Whispering Jack in 1986, Age of Reason in 1988, Chain Reaction in 1990, then again in 1993, 33 and a Half in 2000, and The Last Time in 2002. Along with touring with multiple artists, including The Seekers and international acts like Stevie Nicks and Lionel Richie, he released collaborative albums including with Tom Jones on Together in Concert 2005, and Olivia Newton-John, including highlights from the main event 1998, also with Anthony Warlow, Two Strong Hearts Live 2015, and Friends for Christmas 2016. Farnham has been recognised by many honours and awards, including 1987 Australian of the Year, 1996 Officer of the Order of Australia, and 19 ARIA Awards, including his 2003 induction into the Hall of Fame. From 1969, he was voted by TV Week readers as the King of Pop for 5 consecutive years. Australian rock historian Ian McFarlane described him as the most successful solo artist in the history of Australian rock and pop. Farnham has retained an affable sense of humour and a simple, unpretentious, everyman charm, which also makes him one of the most respected celebrities in Australian entertainment history. The Seekers are a folk-influenced pop quartet, originally formed in Melbourne in 1962. They were the first Australian pop music group to achieve major chart and sales success in the United Kingdom and the United States. They were popular during the 1960s, with their best-known configuration as Jules Durham on vocals, piano and tambourine, Athol Guy on double bass and vocals, Keith Potka on 12-string guitar, banjo and vocals, and Bruce Woodley on guitar, mandolin, banjo and vocals. The group had top 10 hits in the 1960s with I'll Never Find Another You, A World of Our Own, Morningtown Ride, Someday, One Day, written by Paul Simon, Georgie Girl, the title song of the film of the same name, and The Carnival Is Over by Tom Springfield. It is still one of the top 50 best-selling singles in the UK. Australian music historian Ian McFarlane described their style as concentrated on a bright, up-tempo sound, although there were too pop to be considered strictly folk and too folk to be considered rock. In 1967, they were named as Joint Australians of the Year, the only group thus honoured. In July 1968, Durham left to pursue a solo career and the group disbanded. The band has reformed periodically, and in 1995, they were inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame. With I'll Never Find Another You and Georgie Girl, the band also achieved success in the United States, but not nearly at the same level as in the rest of the world. The Seekers have sold over 50 million records worldwide. The Seekers were individually honoured as Officers of the Order of Australia in the Queen's Birthday Honours of June 2014. Midnight Oil, known informally as The Oils, are a rock band composed of Peter Garrett, vocals, harmonica, Rob Hurst, drums, Jim Moginier, guitar, keyboard, and Martin Rotsu, guitar. The group was formed in Sydney in 1972 by Hurst, Moginier, and original bassist Andrew James as Farm. They enlisted Garrett the following year, changed their name in 1976, and hired Rotsu a year later. Peter Gifford served as a bass player from 1980 to 1987, with Bones Hillman then assuming the role until his death in 2020. Midnight Oil issued their self-titled debut album in 1978 and gained a cult following in their homeland, despite a lack of mainstream media acceptance. The band achieved greater popularity throughout Australasia with the release of 10-9-8-7-6-5-4-3-2-1 in 1982, which spawned the singles Power and the Passion and US Forces, and also began to attract an audience in the United States. They achieved their first Australian #1 album in 1984, with Red Sails in the Sunset, and topped their native country singles chart for 6 weeks with the EP Species Diseases in 1985. The group garnered worldwide attention with 1987 album Diesel and Dust. Its singles The Dead Heart and Beds Are Burning illuminated the plight of Indigenous Australians, with the latter charting at #1 in multiple countries. Midnight Oil had continued global success with Blue Sky Mining in 1990 and Earth and Sun and Moon in 1993, each buoyed by an international hit single in Blue Sky Mine and Truganini, respectively. and remained a formidable album chart presence in Australia until their 2002 disbandment. The group held concerts sporadically during the remainder of the 2000s and announced a full-scale reformation in 2016. The band's music often broaches political subjects, and they have lent their support to multiple left-wing causes. They have won 11 ARIA Awards and were inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame in 2006. Midnight Oil's legacy has grown since the late 1970s, with the outfit being cited as an influence, and their songs covered by numerous popular artists. Aside from their studio output, the group is celebrated for their energetic live performances, which showcase the frenetic dancing of Garrett. Guardian writer Andrew Street described Midnight Oil as one of Australia's most beloved bands. Peter Allen was a singer-songwriter, musician, and entertainer, known for his flamboyant stage persona, boundless energy, and lavish costumes. His songs were made popular by many recording artists, including Elkie Brooks, Melissa Manchester, and Olivia Newton-John, with one, Arthur's Theme, Best That You Can Do, by Christopher Cross, winning an Academy Award for Best Original Song in 1981. In addition to recording many albums, he enjoyed a cabaret and concert career, including appearances at the Radio City Music Hall riding a camel. His patriotic song, I Still Call Australia Home, has been used extensively in advertising campaigns and was added to the National Film and Sound Archive Sounds of Australia registry in 2013. In 1998, a musical about his life, The Boy from Oz, debuted in Australia. It ran on Broadway and earned Hugh Jackman a Tony Award for Best Actor in a Musical. Paul Kelly, AO, is a rock music singer-songwriter and guitarist. He has performed solo and has led numerous groups, including The Dots, The Coloured Girls, and The Messengers. He has worked with other artists and groups, including Associated Projects, Professor Ratbaggy, and Stardust 5. Kelly's music style has ranged from bluegrass to studio-oriented dub reggae, but his core output straddles folk, rock, and country. His lyrics capture the vastness of the culture and landscape of Australia by chronicling life about him for over 30 years. David Fricke from Rolling Stone calls Kelly one of the finest songwriters I have ever heard, Australian or otherwise. Kelly has said, "Songwriting is mysterious to me. I still feel like a total beginner. I don't feel like I've got it nailed yet." After growing up in Adelaide, Kelly travelled around Australia before settling in Melbourne in 1976. He became involved in the pub rock scene and drug culture and recorded 2 albums with Paul Kelly and The Dots. Kelly moved to Sydney by 1985, where he formed Paul Kelly and the Coloured Girls. The band was renamed Paul Kelly and the Messengers, initially only for international releases to avoid possible racial interpretations of the word coloured. At the end of the 1980s, Kelly returned to Melbourne, and in 1991 he disbanded the Messengers. Kelly was married and divorced twice. He has 3 children and resides in St Kilda, Melbourne. On the 22nd of September 2010, Kelly released his memoir, How to Make Gravy, which he described as, "It's not traditional, it's writing around the A to Z theme. I tell stories around the song lyrics in alphabetical order." His biographical film, Paul Kelly, Stories of Me, directed by Ian Darling, was released to cinemas in October 2012. Kelly's top 40 singles include Billy Baxter, Before Too Long, Darling It Hurts, To Her Door, his highest charting local hit in 1987. Dumb Things appeared on United States charts in 1988, and Roll On Summer. Top 20 albums include Gossip, Under the Sun, Comedy, Songs from the South, 1997 compilation, Nothing But a Dream, Stolen Apples, Spring and Fall, The Merry Soul Sessions, 7 Sonnets and a Song, Death's a Dateless Night with Charlie Owen, Life is Fine, his first #1 album, and Nature. Kelly has won 14 ARIA Music Awards, including his induction into their Hall of Fame in 1997. In 2001, the Australasian Performing Rights Association, APRA, listed the top 30 Australian songs of all time, which included Kelly's To Her Door and Treaty, written by Kelly and members of Yothu Yindi. Aside from Treaty, Kelly wrote or co-wrote several songs on Indigenous Australian social issues and historical events. He provided songs for many other artists, tailoring them to their particular vocal range. The album Women at the Well from 2002 had 14 female artists record his songs in tribute. Kelly was appointed as an Officer of the Order of Australia in 2017 for distinguished service to the performing arts and to the promotion of the national identity through contributions as a singer, songwriter, and musician. Dame Olivia Newton-John, ACDBE, is a British-Australian singer, songwriter, actress, entrepreneur, and activist. She is a 4-time Grammy Award winner whose chart career includes 5 US number ones and another 10 top 10s on Billboard's Hot 100 and 2 Billboard 200 number 1 albums. If You Love Me, Let Me Know in 1974 and Have You Never Been Mellow in 1975. 11 of her singles, including 2 platinum, and 14 of her albums, including 2 platinum and 4 2x platinum, have been certified gold by the Recording Industry Association of America, RIAA. She's sold an estimated 120 million records worldwide, making her one of the best-selling music artists of all time. In 1978, she starred in the musical film Grease, whose soundtrack remains one of the most successful in history. It features 2 major hit duets with co-star John Travolta, You're the One That I Want, which ranks as one of the best-selling singles of all time, and Summer Nights. Her signature solo recordings include the Record of the Year Grammy winner, I Honestly Love You in 1974, and Physical in 1981, Billboard's top Hot 100 single of the 1980s, plus her cover of If Not For You in 1971, Let Me Be There 1973, If You Love Me, Let Me Know 1974, Have You Never Been Mellow 1975, Sam in 1977, Hopelessly Devoted to You, also from Grease, A Little More Love 1978, Heart Attack 1982, and from the 1980 film Xanadu, Magic, and Xanadu with Electric Light Orchestra. Newton-John has been a long-time activist for environmental and animal rights issues. She's been an advocate for health awareness, becoming involved with various charities, health products, and fundraising efforts. Her business interests have included launching several product lines for Koala Blue and co-owning the Geyer Retreat and Spa in Australia. Nick Cave, AO, is a singer, songwriter, author, screenwriter, composer, and occasional actor. Known for his baritone voice and for fronting the rock band Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Cave's music is generally characterized by emotional intensity, a wide variety of influences, and lyrical obsessions with death, religion, love, and violence. Born and raised in rural Victoria, Cave studied art in Melbourne before fronting The Birthday Party, one of the city's leading post-punk bands in the late 1970s. They relocated to London in 1980, but disillusioned by life there, evolved towards a darker, more challenging sound that helped inspire gothic rock and acquired a reputation as the most violent live band in the world. Cave became recognised for his confrontational performances, his shock of black hair, and pale, emaciated look. The band broke up soon after moving to Berlin in 1982, and Cave formed Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds the year after, later described as one of rock's most redoubtable, enduring bands. Much of their early material is set in a mythic American Deep South, drawing on spirituals and Delta blues, while Cave's preoccupation with Old Testament notions of good versus evil culminated in what has been called his signature song, The Mercy Seat, in 1988, and in his debut novel, And the Ass Saw the Angel, in 1989. Also in 1988, he starred in Ghosts of the Civil Dead, an Australian prison film which he co-wrote and scored. The 1990s saw Cave move between Sao Paulo and England and find inspiration in the New Testament. He went on to achieve mainstream success with quieter, piano-driven ballads, notably the Kylie Minogue duet Where the Wild Roses Grow in 1996 and Into My Arms in 1997. Turning increasingly to film in the 2000s, Cave wrote the Australian western The Proposition in 2005, composing its soundtrack with frequent collaborator Warren Ellis. The pair's film score credits include The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford in 2007, The Road in 2009, and Lawless in 2012. And their garage rock side project, Grinderman, has released 2 LPs in 2006. In 2009, he released his second novel, The Death of Bunny Munro, and starred in the semi-fictional Day in the Life film 20,000 Days on Earth in 2014. His more recent musical work features ambient and electronic elements, as well as increasingly abstract lyrics, informed in part by grief over his son Arthur's death in 2015, which is explored in the documentary One More Time with Feeling in 2016, and The Bad Seeds' 17th and latest LP Ghosteen in 2019. Cave maintains the Red Hand Files, a newsletter he uses to respond to questions from fans. His work is the subject of academic study, and his songs have been covered by a wide range of artists. He was inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame in 2007 and named an Officer of the Order of Australia in 2017. Helen Reddy was an Australian-American singer, songwriter, author, actress and activist. Born in Melbourne, Victoria, to a show business family, Reddy started her career as an entertainer at age 4. She sang on radio and television and won a talent contest on the television program Bandstand in 1966. She pursued her international singing career by moving to Chicago and subsequently Los Angeles, where she made her debut singles One Way Ticket and I Believe in Music in 1968 and 1970 respectively. The B-side of the latter single, I Don't Know How to Love Him, reached number 8 on the pop chart of the Canadian magazine RPM. She was signed to Capitol Records a year later. During the 1970s, Reddy enjoyed international success, especially in the United States, where she placed 15 singles on the top 40 of the Billboard Hot 100. 6 made the top 10 and 3 reached number 1, including her signature hit, I Am Woman. She placed 25 songs on the Billboard Adult Contemporary chart, 15 made the top 10, and 8 reached number 1, 6 consecutively. In 1974, at the inaugural American Music Awards, she won the award for Favourite Pop Rock Female Artist. On television, she was the first Australian to host a 1-hour weekly primetime variety show on an American network, along with specials that were seen in more than 40 countries. Reddy's song, I Am Woman, played a significant role in popular culture, becoming an anthem for second-wave feminism. She came to be known as a feminist poster girl, or a feminist icon. In 2011, Billboard named her the number 28 adult contemporary artist of all time, the number 9 woman. In 2013, the Chicago Tribune dubbed her the Queen of 70s Pop. So many names that make up the early days of rock and roll and live music. And that wraps up our first episode on Australian music. I hope you enjoyed hearing all about the early beginnings of our music scene here in Australia and how it developed up to the late 70s. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll take it from the 1980s onwards. Bye for now!